Measles, mumps, rubella, oral polio vaccine, combined tetanus and diphtheria toxoids. We currently have no DTP vaccine in the stockpile.
A surge in liability lawsuits is driving drug makers out of the vaccine business. What does that mean for public health programs? And could diseases that have been all but wiped out make a comeback? And we'll pay tribute to Eric Shaw, a pitcher who tonight became part of a legend.
Center field, and there it
is! This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Parents used to have nightmares about the kinds of childhood diseases that today have been all but obliterated in the United States. Vaccines have not only been developed, they've been almost universally distributed in this country, and that has to be a blessing. But every once in a while, one of those vaccinations has an unexpected and almost certainly unintended side effect. And children are physically or mentally crippled by the very medicine that was developed to protect them. And then there are lawsuits, some of which have resulted in such huge judgments or settlements that pharmaceutical companies are beginning to question the wisdom and the profitability of continuing vaccine production. And now there is talk of shortages. Here's George Strait.
Life in an iron lung, the devastating after effects of polio. High fever and uncontrollable coughing, symptoms of whooping cough. Not so long ago, these were common scenes. Childhood diseases like polio and whooping cough and even measles were the nation's chief public health problem.
These illnesses used to kill and cripple thousands of kids in the United States, and in developing nations where vaccines are not widely available, they still kill thousands of children every year. So we've forgotten all that because our vaccine campaigns have been so successful.
Okay, she's going to have, I think it's her second shot, right? Yeah. Her second DPT and polio. That's diphtheria, whooping cough, and tetanus.
By law, children must be immunized against diphtheria, whooping cough, and tetanus with the DPT vaccine. And they must have measles, mumps, and rubella vaccinations. As a result, these diseases have been virtually wiped out. But public health officials now worry these diseases could return. 11 times in the last 9 years, the country has come perilously close to running out of these vaccines. Even now, there is a shortage.
We're in the midst of a crisis in our childhood vaccination program. The withdrawal of 2 of the 3 pharmaceutical manufacturers of DPT from the market last year resulted in a shortage of the vaccine. That led to the unprecedented action of CDC advising physicians to delay giving the DPT booster shots in order to ensure a sufficient supply of the vaccine to immunize infants from these highly contagious diseases.
Not only is DPT vaccine in short supply, but the vaccines against polio, measles, mumps, and rubella as well. Officials here at the National Academy of Sciences call that shortage a threat to the public health. The NAS says a 6-month stockpile is the minimum needed.
We presently have about a 3-month supply of measles, mumps, rubella, oral polio vaccine, combined tetanus and diphtheria toxoids. We currently have no DTP vaccine in the stockpile.
The primary reason for the short supply is a shortage of suppliers. Only 2 companies manufacture a DPT vaccine, Latterly and Connaught. At one time, there were 4. Latterly is the only company that makes the oral polio vaccine, and Merck Sharp & Dohme is the only manufacturer of measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. A number of factors have driven drug companies out of the vaccine business. High manufacturing costs, extensive government regulation, declining birth rates, therefore declining demand. It's all produced low profit margins. But perhaps the most important factor is lawsuits.
What can we do with our arms? Sing with me. Come on. Roll.
12-year-old Steve Smullen, who was a bright and healthy baby, is now totally dependent.
Roll. Tell me. Oh, roll. Good. Roll.
He's plagued by seizures and can't talk. His problems began after his 3rd DPT shot.
We're told that his IQ, as best they can test it, runs 18 to 22.
Right.
Will he ever improve? I don't think so.
Angered, the Smullins became one of the hundreds of parents who have sued because of injuries allegedly caused by the DPT vaccine. The Smullins, who sued the National Drug Company, settled out of court for $800,000.
No, I don't want money. I'll give them back their money. Give me back my son. Make him well. Get this thing over with, and we'll go on with our lives.
Today, our commitment to supplying vaccines is seriously threatened by dramatic upsurge in liability. We are being barraged with an assault of lawsuits. At this time, the total dollar demand against elderly and childhood vaccine litigation exceeds $2 billion.
About 4 million American children are given the DPT vaccine every year. Fewer than 100 end up like Steve Smullin. While the incidence of adverse reactions is small, claims from them have cost drug companies billions and driven many more from the market because they can't get insurance. Besides being unfair, Letterly says the suits will backfire.
I think all it may do is say it's not worth going through that hassle, so why be in the business?
It doesn't make you make a better vaccine?
I don't think that the threat of punitive action makes you a better vaccine. Research is not founded on, how do we keep people out of jail?
Do the threats of these suits increase the cost for the consumer?
Sure.
DPT shots, which 3 years ago cost $8 a dose, are up to $30 in some places. And oral polio vaccine has doubled in price in 2 years. The increased cost has affected supplies in public health clinics, which for the most part serve the poor.
We've got to sort out a system that, number one, protects anyone who's injured in the course of immunization adequately, protects them promptly and protects them properly, and number two, that allows our drug industry to continue to produce vaccines.
Congress is considering legislation that would put a cap on the amount of money for which a person could sue. And Congress has been asked to create a special $1 million commission to oversee research and development into new vaccines. Experts agree that the cost of maintaining a continuing supply of safe and effective vaccines against childhood diseases will be high. But if that supply is not maintained, the cost to the public health will be even higher. This is George Strait for Nightline in Washington.
When we come back, we'll talk live with Robert Johnson, president of the Letterly Laboratories Pharmaceutical Company, and with Dr. George Patar, a leading Boston pediatrician.
According to the Centers for Disease Control, the chance of paralysis from a polio vaccine is 1 in 3 million doses. The chance of brain damage from pertussis or whooping cough vaccine is 1 in 300,000 doses. The chance of acute encephalitis from combined measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines is less than 1 in 1 million doses. And there's virtually no risk from diphtheria or tetanus vaccines. This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by BMW.
Every day at the BMW factory. Every step of the way.
At Entree, we bring in consultants, instructors, technicians to assess your needs. And only when we know you thoroughly.
Now we've got something to show you.
Will we show you a computer? At Entree Computer Centers, we're with you every step of the way.
For filling the corners.
$1,000 for lines across or down.
It's Tic-Tac-Toe in the Boston Herald, the new game that's like Tic-Tac-Toe, but with $50,000 a week to be won. To win your share,
check the mail for your Tic-Tac-Toe game card. Or get one free in the Herald this Sunday and get ready to play.
Double diagonal!
$10,000! It's as easy as the game you played as a kid, but with $50,000 a week to be won. Play new Tic-Tac-Toe in the Boston Herald.
At Midas, we'll meet or beat any competitor's price for a new muffler based on a written estimate. For value, no one can touch Midas.
There is no room in a Christian heart for racism. There is no room in a Christian heart for anti-Semitism.
Castro, snubbed by America, forced to stay in a Harlem hotel, was visited by Russia's Nikita Khrushchev. Now, from his private memoirs, Khrushchev tells how he won Castro over. 4585. See how the future began. Wednesday, September 18th.
Joining us live now from our affiliate WFAA in Dallas is Robert Johnson, president of the Letterly Laboratories, one of the 2 drug companies in the nation that still produce DPT vaccine. And in our Boston bureau, Dr. George Pater, whose name I mangled a moment ago, for which I apologize, a specialist in children's diseases and a professor of pediatrics at Brown University, which of course is not in Boston, but in Rhode Island. Having gotten those mistakes out of the way, let me begin, Mr. Johnson, if I may, with you, and let's go to the tough issues right away. Your critics say maybe the drug industries are trying to engage in a scare campaign here to relieve themselves of the kind of financial Damocles sword that is hanging over their heads and to get the government to make it easier for them, to which you say what?
Ted, we have been working with the Congress to try and propose some legislation, and in that particular legislation we were not asking for a government bailout, but for the opportunity to have some sort of predictability for the liability, and also the manufacturers under our proposal or under the proposal before the Congress, the manufacturers would still bear that burden.
Well, the manufacturers would, as I understand it, either under one plan there would be a ceiling on the kinds of claims that could be made against you, or there would be some kind of a pool from which the parents and families and children who had been adversely affected by a vaccine could draw. Is that not correct?
Yes, the proposal in the Hawkins bill was for a pool, yes.
Now, but this would decrease then the financial risk for your companies. So I repeat my question. Is there now, in any sense, a scare campaign being run by the pharmaceutical companies to kind of stampede Congress into passing this kind of legislation?
I really don't think it's a scare campaign at all, Ted. I think it's trying to be realistic as far as the number of suits that have been filed and the potential amounts that are there, that it is a mounting question that needs to be faced.
Well, of course, obviously the number of suits is a direct outcome of the number of people who are adversely affected by the vaccine. In theory, that's very few, isn't it?
In theory, that is very few. I think one of the complications is that at the age at which the vaccine is given, there's a number of other complications that children do experience, and direct causation by vaccines are not always easily determined.
Let me put it to you this way. Is Letterly in any danger of stopping the production of the vaccines that it now produces?
At the moment, no, Ted, but the concern is really for the future and the predictability, because any one of some of the major suits that are there can wipe out profitability and increase the exposure that the company has.
Dr. Pater, from the physician's point of view, how real is the problem of not having adequate supplies of vaccine?
Well, Ted, I think as was mentioned earlier, we did have a shortage last winter and had to take steps to defer vaccinations at certain ages, so that the problem is a real one, and our concern is that it will occur again.
Now, the problem is real, but do you attribute it to the same causes? In other words, do you think that companies, from what you understand, are pharmaceutical companies going out of business because they're getting hit by too many lawsuits, or that those lawsuits that they are getting hit by are simply too expensive?
Well, my understanding is that their problem relates to difficulties in getting liability insurance. And as a result of difficulty obtaining insurance, they're unwilling to produce the vaccine.
And what would be the alternative if they don't? Could not the government produce it?
Well, the government could. There are a number of different options that could be considered, one of which is the government, but we live in a free enterprise system, and we would like to obviously have as many different producers as possible in the vaccine field in general.
Mr. Johnson, what would be your concern? I mean, if this is a problem for you, a financial problem, or for the other companies, then indeed we do live in a free enterprise system. No one's forcing you to produce these vaccines. Why don't you just stop? Let the government do it.
Well, we could. Letterly, particularly, has been committed to the vaccine business really since our inception in 1906. We believe that it's a good product to be produced, and as long as it's economically feasible, we would do so.
Do you make money off it right now?
We make money at the moment, but the question is the exposure for the future, that any one of these lawsuits could in fact wipe out the profitability that you've made.
But if I said to you, let the states, let the federal government produce it, in principle, you have any objection?
Well, I think the problem there is that the expertise to make vaccines doesn't come easily, and I think that's one of the reasons why there are so few manufacturers in the business today.
Why don't you donate it to the government? You know, that'll relieve you of the problem of these liability suits and will assuage your conscience in terms of letting the vaccine be produced.
Well, that in theory is certainly a possibility, but I don't believe then that the litigation is going to become any less, and then the government is going to bear that particular liability.
All right, we're going to pick up on that theme because when we come back, we'll discuss the problems that liability law creates for vaccine producers and possibly also for the government with Professor Arthur Miller of the Harvard Law School.
We just moved in and have a million things to do. Where should we start?
It's Sherwin-Williams' biggest sale ever. Save on our best paints, stains, and sprays, brushes and supplies, sprayers, ladders, and tools. Thousands of wall coverings, pleated shades, horizontals, verticals, and floor coverings. Almost everything, all on sale.
Thanks a million, Sherwin-Williams.
Sherwin-Williams.
June 1985, a taste test with 180 people between Mrs. Butterworth's and a new syrup. The catch, all 180 are Mrs. Butterworth's users who expect thickness, richness, and of course, buttery flavor. Yet surprisingly, 45% prefer the new syrup, Aunt Jemima Butter Light. And Butter Light has only half the calories and sugar of Mrs. Butterworth's, so it isn't just good news for Butter Light, it's good news for us all. Butter Light, new from Aunt
Some Air Express companies must have special training classes. Otherwise, where would they come up with their excuses?
I know the package is late, but there's a lot of traffic between here and the airport.
Excellent! Delivery by 10:30 a.m. We'll make every conceivable effort. Very good!
Got a man out sick and another just quit on me.
Wonderful!
There's only one reason to choose an Air Express company: reliability. And that means Federal Express. Why fool around with anyone else?
I found a place where we can put up a cabin.
I'd like to see it.
When you've got to go places where the road comes later, whistle for the 1985 Toyota 4x4, the most powerful small truck ever built, with the highest running ground clearance of any small 4x4. No wonder it's the best-selling small 4x4 in America.
They plan to put a road in?
You care?
A surprising place. A stunning place. In Boston, it's Copley Place.
You're looking at Stephen Wayne Vineyard, one of over 1.5 million children reported missing each year. You can help find them by looking at their pictures and descriptions on one of these message displays now in major supermarkets. And please, jot down the toll-free number. With your help, we can reunite a missing child with loving parents. You can't do better than that.
With us now live in our Boston Bureau is Professor Arthur Miller of the Harvard Law School, an expert on the product liability laws that have been the basis of lawsuits against vaccine manufacturers. Arthur, there is no question but that society's greater good is served by these vaccines. Probably millions of young lives have been saved in one form or another. But where does society draw the line? I mean, if no one can force these pharmaceutical companies to go on producing if they're being sued out of business, what happens if the government takes over? Can we sue the government?
Oh, I think we can sue the government, although we used to have a notion of sovereign immunity, that the government can do no wrong and therefore you can't sue the King or the United States or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Those days are behind us. If the government did take over the production of these vaccines, I'm sure that there would be a mechanism. The state or the United States government would establish an insurance pool against which people could sue. So I think the compensation system as we know it today would go on largely intact, except the defendants would be the government as producer rather than Lederle or some other drug company as producer.
All right, let's take the question this way then. Some of these settlements, some of these judgments against drug companies have been enormous. Now, if a child's life is absolutely destroyed, $800,000 sounds like a lot of money to that family, as that mother just said. You know, take the money back, just give me my son back the way he ought to be. Can there be a limit imposed? Can we arbitrarily set a ceiling on how much can be awarded?
We can, but you used exactly the right word. It would be arbitrary. Let's face it, you cannot really calibrate or appraise the value of a destroyed human being, a child that's paralyzed or unable to function. Our historic approach to these problems has been, look, every citizen is an individual. That citizen has a right to go to court, to tell the court, to tell a jury of his or her peers, other citizens, what his grievance is, how he's been injured, and let the community, speaking through that jury, do its best job at appraising the value of the damage and compensate that plaintiff. And maybe if the injury was particularly grotesque or the conduct of the corporation particularly bad, add punishment to the compensation. Any attempt to set a cap on damages by enacting some figure would be arbitrary, would be seen by citizens as another bureaucratic move, another way of protecting large corporations against individuals. And I think there would be considerable resentment against it, as well as a loss of deterrence in terms of the way corporations behave in the manufacture of their products. So there's a downside to federal legislation with an arbitrary cap on it.
All right, Mr. Johnson, you obviously don't feel that you need to be kept in check that way. You would argue that what keeps you producing the best kind of vaccine, if not the fear of litigation?
Well, several things, Ted. One is that all of the product vaccines that are produced by Lederle each lot is approved and released by the Office of Biologicals. The standards that we have internally are met, so that, and if we are grossly negligent, there are already laws in place through the FDA that would take care of that. So that to use compensation as a form of punitive action, I don't believe is the way to go.
That's naive, Ted. Let's face it, as good as the government's regulatory process may be, drugs with defects, drugs that harm, do sneak through. We've had thalidomide, we've had bendectin, we've had DES. For those cases, we do need, I think, some form of compensation scheme. And for hundreds of years, that compensation scheme has come through the courts. And I'm not sure we should panic in the face of what may be a temporary shortage of vaccines, or what may be a temporary upsurge in litigation against drug companies. These things come and go. There are waves, and I personally feel that the imposed liability on corporate America may have crested, that we may now see a growing recognition of the need to allow corporations to manufacture their products without the sword of litigation daily at the back of their neck. So,
all right, let's give Mr. Johnson a quick chance to respond, and then I'll go back to Dr. Pater for a moment.
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
I think we're back to the point of the compensation. Nobody is questioning the case of whether you're using compensation as punishment. I don't think it's necessary, particularly in the vaccine field.
All right, I do want to get back to our opening point, and Dr. Pater, quickly in the last 40 or so seconds, tell us how big a problem the shortages are.
The shortages are a threat. We live in a very precarious situation, and I might add that we've spent a lot of this time on legalistic issues discussing the right of the individuals to sue the government, but I think we have another tremendous obligation, which is to continue to prevent these childhood diseases, which once were so common are now preventable. And it would be a tragedy that in the interests of the freedom to sue, etc., that in any way the continued immunization of these children was in any way threatened.
All right, gentlemen, I thank you all very much indeed for joining us this evening. When we come back, we'll take a brief look at a man who